The cold metal floor bit into Jake Morrison's cheek as he slowly opened his eyes. His head pounded like someone had used it as a drum, and the taste of blood filled his mouth. The last thing he remembered was the bright flash of plasma fire cutting through his squad's position on Kepler 442b. Now he was somewhere else entirely. Jake pushed himself up on his elbows and looked around. He was in a cell. The walls were smooth black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Energy bars hummed across the front opening, casting everything in a sick blue glow. Beyond the bars, he could see a long corridor lined with similar cells. This was not human technology. The air tasted different too, thick and heavy with the smell of sulfur and ozone. Jake had been captured by aliens. He sat up fully and checked his body for injuries. His marine uniform was torn and dirty, but he seemed mostly intact. A few cuts and bruises, nothing serious. His weapons were gone, of course. Even his combat knife had been taken. Jake tried to remember exactly what had happened during the ambush. His reconnaissance squad had been investigating strange energy readings on the forest moon when the attack came. Massive, lizard-like creatures in powered armor had appeared from nowhere, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Their weapons had cut through trees like paper. His squad had fought hard, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Jake had seen Martinez go down first, then Johnson, then the rest of them one by one. He had kept fighting until a stun blast dropped him. Now his team was dead, and he was alone. The corridor outside his cell was quiet, except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Jake could feel the vibration through the floor. He was definitely on a spacecraft, probably a big one judging by how steady everything felt. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Jake moved to the back of his cell and waited. 3 figures appeared outside the energy bars. They were tall, maybe 8 feet high, with thick scaled skin that looked like armor. Their heads were long and narrow with yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. One of them wore more decorations on its armor than the others. The decorated one spoke in a voice like grinding stone. The words were alien, but Jake understood them perfectly. The translation device they had implanted in his head during capture was working. "So this is the human vermin," the creature said. "Smaller than I expected. Are you certain this one killed 6 of our warriors?" One of the others nodded. "Yes, Commander Vexthul. The battle recordings show this human fought with unexpected skill. It may prove useful for interrogation." Vexthul studied Jake through the energy bars. His yellow eyes showed nothing but contempt. "Humans. Another weak species that thinks it can resist the Zephyrian Empire. We have crushed 1,000 worlds, little mammal. Your people are nothing special." Jake met the alien's stare without flinching. "My people don't give up easy." Vexthul made a sound that might have been laughter. "Brave words from a creature in a cage. We shall see how long that courage lasts under questioning. But first you have the honor of meeting our most dangerous prisoner. Perhaps sharing a cell with a true monster will soften your resolve." The commander gestured to his subordinates. "Take it to detention block 7, cell 42. "Sir," one of them said. "That is where we keep the Pyrothane Prince. Are you certain we should?" "I am certain," Vexthul interrupted. "Let them destroy each other, or perhaps the dragon will break the human's mind before we need to dirty our claws. Either way, it saves us effort." The energy bars flickered off. 2 of the Zephyrians grabbed Jake by his arms and hauled him to his feet. Their grip was like being caught in a metal press. Jake did not resist as they dragged him down the corridor. He used the time to study the ship's layout and count the guards he saw. They passed dozens of empty cells and a few occupied ones. Jake caught glimpses of other prisoners, creatures from species he did not recognize. All of them looked broken and defeated. The Zephyrians were clearly experienced at capturing and holding prisoners from across the galaxy. The detention block they brought him to was different from the others. The cells here were larger and the energy bars glowed brighter. This was where they kept the dangerous ones. Jake's guard stopped in front of a cell at the end of the corridor. "Enjoy your new home, human," one of them said as they prepared to activate the door controls. Jake looked through the energy bars and saw something that made his breath catch. In the back corner of the cell was the largest living creature he had ever seen. It was easily 12 feet long and covered in scales that seemed to shift color in the dim light. Wings were folded against its back and a long tail twitched with barely controlled power. A dragon. Or something very much like the dragons from Earth's oldest stories. The creature's head turned toward the cell entrance as the energy bars flickered off. Eyes like molten gold fixed on Jake with ancient intelligence and barely contained rage. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant, carrying the weight of nobility and loss. "Another sacrifice for the Zephyrians' amusement," the dragon said. "Tell me, small one, what species are you that they think pairing you with me will provide entertainment?" Jake stepped into the cell as the energy bars reactivated behind him. He kept his movements slow and non-threatening, but he did not show fear. "I'm human. My name is Jake Morrison." The dragon studied him for a long moment. "Human. I have heard whispers of your kind. A young species that has recently discovered space travel. You are far from your home, Jake Morrison." "Yeah, well, that seems to be going around," Jake said. He found a spot along the wall and sat down, keeping a respectful distance from the dragon but not cowering in the corner. The dragon's expression showed surprise at Jake's calm response. Most creatures thrown into this cell either attacked in panic or collapsed in terror. This human did neither. "I am Drakmor," the dragon said finally. "Prince of the Pyrothane royal house, though that title means little now that my people are nearly extinct." Jake nodded respectfully. "Your Highness." Something shifted in Drakmor's golden eyes. It had been a very long time since anyone had addressed him with proper respect. The first day in the cell passed in tense silence. Drakmor watched Jake from across the small space, waiting for the human to show his true nature. Most creatures placed in this cell either tried to attack him or spent their time cowering and begging for mercy. Jake did neither. Instead, the human sat quietly against the wall, observing everything around him. His eyes tracked the movement of guards in the corridor, noted the timing of their patrols, and studied the energy field that kept them trapped. Drakmor found this behavior curious. This was not how prey animals acted. On the second day, Jake finally broke the silence. "How long have you been here?" Drakmor's tail twitched with annoyance. "Long enough to know that escape is impossible. The Zephyrians are not fools despite what their arrogance suggests." "Nothing's impossible," Jake said. "Just takes the right approach." "Spoken like someone who has never faced the full might of the Empire," Drakmor replied. "They have conquered half the galaxy, human. Your species has barely left its home system." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That's true. We're new to space travel, only been out here about 50 years. He paused, then looked directly at Drakmor. "But we've been fighting wars a lot longer than that." Something in the human's tone made Drakmor pay closer attention. There was weight behind those words, experience that seemed older than the young face that spoke them. By the third day, they began sharing their stories. Drakmor spoke of the glory days of the Pyrothane civilization, when his people ruled vast sectors of space and were respected as the galaxy's greatest warriors. He described worlds of crystal cities and floating spires, technologies that could reshape matter with thought alone. "We grew comfortable," Drakmor admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "We thought our power made us untouchable. When the Zephyrians first appeared, we dismissed them as another minor species seeking to challenge their betters. We were wrong." Jake listened without judgment as Drakmor described the systematic destruction of his people. The Zephyrians had studied the Pyrothanes carefully before striking. They learned their weaknesses, corrupted their allies, and turned their own pride against them. World after world fell until only scattered refugees remained. "I was leading a supply raid when they captured me," Drakmor said. "My last free act was watching 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts surround my ship. They want to execute me publicly to crush what little hope remains among my people." When it was Jake's turn to speak, he described Earth's first contact with the Zephyrian Empire. His words painted a picture of surprise attacks on human colonies, orbital bombardments that turned cities to glass, and desperate evacuations under enemy fire. "They hit us hard and fast," Jake said. Billions died in the first wave. Our technology was centuries behind theirs. Most species would have surrendered immediately. But humans did not, Drakmor observed. No. We don't surrender easy. Every human world they took, we made them pay for it. Every ship they destroyed, we built 2 more. They thought they could break us with fear, but fear just made us angry. As Jake spoke about human resistance tactics, Drakmor began to notice something unusual. The human's knowledge went far beyond what a simple marine should know. He spoke of fleet movements and supply lines with the understanding of someone who had helped plan them. His grasp of xenobiology was impressive, and he seemed familiar with technologies that humans should never have encountered. On the 4th day, Zephyrian guards came for Drakmor. They dragged him from the cell to an interrogation chamber deeper in the ship. Jake watched them go with cold eyes that promised violence. The torture session lasted for hours. The Zephyrians wanted information about hidden pyrothane refuges, secret weapons caches, anything that might lead them to the survivors of Drakmor's people. They used pain inducers, neural probes, and chemical compounds designed to break mental resistance. Drakmor endured it all in silence. He had been trained from birth to resist interrogation, and his royal bloodline carried genetic modifications that made him naturally resistant to most forms of torture. But the Zephyrians were persistent and creative in their cruelty. When they finally brought him back to the cell, Drakmor was barely conscious. Burns covered his scales and his left wing hung at an unnatural angle. Jake immediately moved to help him, tearing strips from his own uniform to bandage the worst wounds. You should not, Drakmor gasped. If they see you helping me, they will hurt you too. Let them try, Jake said simply. His hands were gentle but sure as he worked, showing knowledge of battlefield medicine that seemed out of place for his supposed rank. That night, as Drakmor recovered from his injuries, Jake kept watch by the cell entrance. When guards passed by, they saw the human sitting calmly in meditation pose. They did not see the way his eyes tracked their movements or how he counted their numbers. Why do you help me? Drakmor asked during a quiet moment. Jake considered the question carefully. Because you're a warrior fighting for your people. I respect that. And because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Even if that friend is a monster from your nightmares? Jake looked at him with those strangely knowing eyes. You're not a monster. You're a prince trying to save what's left of his kingdom. I understand that. Over the following days, their conversations deepened. Jake demonstrated an unusual understanding of galactic history, speaking knowledgeably about wars and conflicts that had happened long before humanity achieved spaceflight. He knew details about alien cultures, their fighting styles, and their tactical preferences. When Drakmor mentioned the Battle of Zerion Prime, expecting the human to look blank, Jake instead nodded and said, The Altarian Third Fleet tried to hold the orbital platforms. Classic mistake. Should have fallen back to the asteroid belt and used hit-and-run tactics. How do you know about Zerion Prime? Drakmor asked, suspicion growing in his voice. That battle happened 60 years ago, before your species had even invented faster-than-light communication. Jake was quiet for a long moment. I read a lot. But Drakmor was beginning to suspect there was much more to his cellmate than a simple marine who liked to read. The human's tactical knowledge was too precise, his understanding of alien psychology, too deep. And there was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that spoke of command authority. On the 7th day, the guards came for Drakmor again. This time, Jake stood up as they entered the cell. Take me instead, Jake said calmly. The lead guard laughed. The Dragon Prince is more valuable than a human insect. Maybe, Jake said, but I might know things that would interest your commander. Information about human military capabilities, tactical data. The guards looked at each other uncertainly. Finally, the leader spoke into his communication device. After a brief conversation, he nodded to his men. Very well, human. You can share the dragon's fate. As they dragged Jake from the cell, Drakmor called out, Why? Jake looked back over his shoulder. Because sometimes the best way to gather intelligence is to let your enemy think they're getting it from you. For the first time since his capture, Drakmor allowed himself to hope that perhaps his new cellmate was more than he appeared to be. The interrogation chamber was a nightmare of alien technology designed to break minds and bodies. Jake sat strapped to a metal chair while Commander Vexthul paced around him like a predator circling wounded prey. Neural probes attached to Jake's temple sent waves of pain through his skull, but his expression remained calm. Fascinating, Vexthul hissed. Most humans scream within minutes of neural contact. You show remarkable resistance for such a primitive species. Jake said nothing. He had endured worse torture than this during his long career. The Zephyrians were skilled, but they were not the first aliens to try breaking his mind. Tell me about human military capabilities, Vexthul demanded. Fleet strength, weapon systems, defensive positions. Spare yourself further pain. I'm just a Marine, Jake replied. I don't know about fleet operations. Vexthul increased the neural probe intensity. Lightning seemed to shoot through Jake's brain, but he merely closed his eyes and controlled his breathing. The commander's frustration grew visible. Your service record says otherwise, Vexthul said, consulting a datapad. Lieutenant Jake Morrison. Multiple commendations for tactical excellence. Survived 3 major engagements against impossible odds. You are no ordinary soldier. Jake opened his eyes and met the alien's stare. Define ordinary. The torture continued for hours. Vexthul used every method in the Zephyrian arsenal, from chemical pain enhancers to psychological pressure techniques. Jake endured it all with the same quiet determination he had shown in the cell. His resistance frustrated the commander beyond measure. Finally, Vexthul threw down his instruments in rage. Take him back to his cell. Perhaps watching his dragon, friend suffer will loosen his tongue. When they brought Jake back to the detention block, Drakmor immediately noticed the burn marks on his arms and the way he moved more carefully than before. The human was hurt, but he was not broken. What did you tell them? Drakmor asked. Nothing they didn't already know, Jake replied, settling against the wall with a slight wince. Standard prisoner information. Name, rank, serial number. They tortured you for hours to learn your name. Jake smiled grimly. They wanted tactical information about human defenses. I gave them some outdated data about colony patrol schedules. Nothing that would help them. Drakmor studied his cellmate with growing curiosity. Most beings broke under Zephyrian interrogation within the first hour. This human had lasted all day and given up nothing of value. That level of resistance required either extraordinary mental training or extensive prior experience with torture. You have done this before, Drakmor said. It was not a question. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at the dragon prince with eyes that seemed much older than his face. Yeah, I have. How many times? More than I care to remember. That night, as they lay in the darkness of their cell, Jake finally began to reveal the truth. His voice was quiet, but every word carried the weight of hard experience. My real name is Jake Morrison, he said. But I'm not Lieutenant Jake Morrison. I'm Admiral Jake Morrison, former Supreme Commander of the Human Defense Coalition. Drakmor's head snapped up in surprise. Admiral? But you look so young. Life extension treatments, Jake explained. Human medical technology advanced rapidly during the war. I'm actually over 200 years old. I've been fighting galactic conflicts since before most species achieved faster-than-light travel. The Dragon Prince stared at him in shock. 200 years? But humans have only been in space for 50 years. Officially, yes. Unofficially, we've been out here much longer. Earth's governments kept early space exploration secret while we learned about the galaxy and the threats it contained. I was part of the first generation of deep space scouts. Jake's story unfolded slowly over the next few days. He had been born on Earth during humanity's first tentative steps into interstellar space. While most humans believed their species was alone in the universe, Jake had grown up knowing the truth about the vast civilizations that filled the galaxy. He had volunteered for the Deep Space Reconnaissance Corps at age 18, spending decades exploring unknown regions and making first contact with dozens of alien species. Some were friendly, many were not. Jake had learned to fight, negotiate, and survive in environments that would kill most humans within hours. The Zephyrian Empire was expanding even then, Jake said. We watched them conquer system after system, always growing stronger. I spent 40 years studying their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. I knew that eventually they would find Earth. When the Zephyrians finally launched their attack on human space, Jake had been ready. He had already begun secretly organizing resistance movements among the species they had conquered. His tactical genius and deep understanding of alien psychology made him the perfect leader for a galactic rebellion. The Ghost Admiral, Drakmor whispered, recognition dawning in his golden eyes. You are the Ghost Admiral. Jake nodded. That's what they call me. Drakmor could hardly believe it. The Ghost Admiral was a legend throughout the galaxy, a mysterious, human commander whose tactical brilliance had turned the tide in dozens of seemingly hopeless battles. Zephyrian commanders spoke his name in hushed tones, and resistance fighters across 1,000 worlds told stories of his impossible victories. But if you are the Ghost Admiral, Drakmor said, then why are you here? Why allow yourself to be captured? Jake's smile was cold and calculating. Because sometimes the best place to gather intelligence is at the heart of enemy operations. This ship is the Zephyrian Empire's primary command vessel. Every strategic decision, every fleet movement, every classified operation passes through. The computers on this ship. You planned this, Drakmor realized. Your capture was deliberate. My reconnaissance mission was real, but secondary. The primary objective was always to get inside this ship. Being thrown into a cell was part of the plan. Drakmor felt a chill run down his spine. What are you planning? Jake looked at him seriously. I'm planning to end this war, but I need your help. My help? I am a prisoner, just as you are. You're Prince Drakmor of the Pyrothane Royal House. Your people were the galaxy's greatest warriors before the Zephyrians crushed them. More importantly, you know things about ancient technology that could turn the tide of this conflict. Jake leaned forward, his voice becoming urgent. I've been building a coalition of resistance groups for decades. Dozens of species, hundreds of worlds, all united against Zephyrian expansion. But we need something more than just ships and weapons. We need hope. We need a symbol that shows the Empire can be beaten. And you think I can provide that symbol? I think you can provide something better. Leadership. The Pyrothanes have a reputation that spans the galaxy. If Prince Drakmor joins, the resistance others will follow. Your people's knowledge of ancient technologies could give us the edge we need. Drakmor was silent for a long time, processing everything Jake had revealed. The human was not at all what he had seemed. Instead of a captured Marine, he was one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. A master strategist who had been fighting the Zephyrian Empire since before Drakmor was born. Why should I trust you? Drakmor asked finally. Jake met his gaze, steadily. Because I'm offering you something the Zephyrians never will. A chance to save your people and restore your kingdom, not through conquest or domination, but through alliance and cooperation. The Dragon Prince considered this. Everything he had observed about Jake supported the human's claims. His tactical knowledge, his resistance to torture, his calm confidence in the face of impossible odds. This was not a simple Marine, but a commander who had spent lifetimes preparing for this moment. If what you say is true, Drakmor said slowly, then you must have a plan for escape. Jake's smile returned, and this time it was full of quiet confidence. Oh, I have a plan. And it starts in about 6 hours when the resistance fleet arrives to rescue us. Drakmor stared at him in amazement. The resistance fleet is coming here. They've been tracking the ship for weeks. My capture was timed to coincide with their arrival. In 6 hours, the Battle of the World Render begins, and the galaxy will see that the Zephyrian Empire can be beaten. For the first time since his capture, Prince Drakmor allowed himself to believe that freedom might be possible. The Ghost Admiral had found him, and together they would either escape or die trying. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. The first sign of trouble came when the ship's lights flickered. Drakmore noticed it immediately, but Jake had been expecting it. The human was counting down the seconds in his head, and everything was happening exactly on schedule. "What was that?" Drakmore asked. "Phase 1. Jake replied calmly. He stood up and moved to the cell's energy barrier, studying the control panel mounted on the wall outside. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Somewhere deep in the ship, alarms began to sound. Jake smiled as he heard the distant noise of running feet and shouted orders in the Zephyrian language. "For weeks I've been subtly damaging this ship's systems," Jake explained as he worked on something small in his hands. "Nothing obvious, just tiny flaws that would cause failures at exactly the right moment. The Zephyrians think I'm just a Marine, so they never suspected sabotage." Drakmore watched in amazement as Jake produced a small electronic device from inside his torn uniform. "How did that survive the searches?" "They took my weapons and equipment, but they didn't look for components built into my clothing. Human technology may be primitive by galactic standards, but we're very good at hiding things." Jake pressed the device against the wall near the energy barrier's control system. The ship shuddered suddenly and the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. The energy barrier across their cell flickered and died. "What is happening?" Drakmore demanded. "The resistance fleet just dropped out of hyperspace," Jake said, stepping through the open cell doorway. "Right about now, Commander Vexthul is discovering that his ship's shields are operating at 30% efficiency. His weapons are misfiring, and his communications are sending false data to the rest of his fleet." Explosions echoed through the ship's hull as the battle began outside. Jake moved quickly down the corridor, checking other cells. Most were empty, but he found 3 prisoners from different species and quickly freed them. "Stay together and head for the escape pods," he told them. "The rescue ships will pick you up." "What about you?" one of them asked. "I have other business to finish." Drakmore followed Jake through the ship's corridors with growing amazement. The human moved like he owned the place, navigating the maze of passages without hesitation. More importantly, he seemed to know exactly where every security system and guard post would be. "How do you know this ship so well?" Drakmore asked as they avoided a patrol of Zephyrian soldiers. "I've had a week to map every deck, memorize every patrol route, and identify every critical system," Jake replied. "Plus, I've studied Zephyrian ship designs for over a century. I probably know this vessel better than most of its crew." They reached a maintenance shaft that Jake had marked during his capture. He pulled off the cover to reveal a narrow passage that led deeper into the ship. "This way. We need to reach the primary computer core." "Why?" Drakmore asked as they crawled through the tight space. "Because all of the Empire's strategic data is stored in this ship's computers. Fleet positions, supply routes, defensive installations, research projects, information that could end this war in months instead of years." The shaft opened into a large chamber filled with massive computer banks and holographic displays. Jake immediately went to work at one of the terminals, his fingers flying over the alien controls with practiced ease. "How do you know their computer systems?" Drakmore asked. "I've had plenty of practice. This isn't the first Zephyrian ship I've infiltrated." Jake's expression was grim as data flowed across the screen. "Though it is the most important one." Alarms blared louder as Jake worked. The ship shook under repeated impacts from the battle raging outside. Through the chambers, viewports, Drakmore could see flashes of weapon fire and the hulks of destroyed vessels. "There," Jake said finally, pulling a data storage device from the computer. "Complete strategic database including the locations of every major Zephyrian installation in this sector." Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Jake grabbed a plasma rifle from a fallen guard they had passed earlier and checked its charge. "Time to go. The hangar bay is 3 decks down." They fought their way through groups of Zephyrian soldiers, and Drakmore was amazed by Jake's combat skills. The human moved with deadly precision, using tactics and techniques that seemed to come from dozens of different fighting traditions. He fought like someone who had studied every known form of combat in the galaxy. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Drakmore asked during a brief pause between battles. 200 years of practice," Jake replied, reloading his weapon. "I've fought alongside warriors from every major species. You pick things up." When they reached the hangar bay, they found chaos. Zephyrian fighters were launching to join the battle while ground crews tried to repair damaged systems. Jake studied the scene carefully, then pointed to a small transport ship near the far wall. That one. It's fueled and ready for launch. It's also surrounded by guards. Jake smiled coldly. Not for long. He produced another small device from his uniform and activated it. Across the hangar bay, explosions rocked the fuel depot and power distribution center. The lights went out again, and in the confusion that followed, Jake and Drakmor made their move. They fought their way to the transport ship, leaving a trail of unconscious guards behind them. Jake's combat style was unlike anything Drakmor had ever seen. He moved like water, flowing around his enemies' attacks and striking with surgical precision. Every movement was calculated, every strike placed exactly where it would do the most damage. "You fight like a Pyrothane warrior," Drakmor said as they reached the ship. "I learned from the best," Jake replied, starting the ship's engines. "I spent 10 years training with a Pyrothane master named Corvex the Flamebearer. He taught me that true strength comes not from power but from understanding." Drakmor's eyes widened in shock. "Corvex was my grandfather's weapons master. He died 50 years ago defending the royal palace." "He died well," Jake said simply, "but not before he taught me everything he knew about Pyrothane combat techniques." The transport ship lifted off just as Zephyrian reinforcements arrived in the hangar. Jake piloted the small craft through the chaos of the space battle with expert skill, dodging plasma bolts and missile strikes. The World Render was taking heavy damage from the Resistance fleet, its systems failing one by one due to Jake's sabotage. "Look at that," Drakmor said, staring out the viewport in wonder. The Resistance fleet was unlike anything either of them had ever seen. Ships from dozens of different species fought side by side, their varied designs and weapon systems creating a beautiful and deadly tapestry of cooperation. Human vessels fought alongside Altarian cruisers. Nexian fighters supported Cordon battleships, and at the center of it all, a massive station that seemed to be coordinating the entire battle. "The Unity Station," Jake explained. "Mobile command base for the Resistance. It took us 20 years to build it, but it was worth every day of effort." Their transport was picked up by the station's tractor beam and pulled into a docking bay, filled with ships from across the galaxy. As they disembarked, Jake was greeted by officers from a dozen different species, all of whom treated him with obvious respect and affection. "Admiral Morrison," one of them said, a tall insectoid being, with 4 arms. "The mission was a complete success. The World Render's strategic database has been transmitted to all fleet commanders." "Excellent work, Captain Zixtar," Jake replied. Then he turned to Drakmor. "Prince Drakmor, I'd like you to meet some of your new allies." Drakmor looked around, at the diverse group of beings surrounding them. These were not conquerors or oppressors, but warriors united by a common cause. For the first time in decades, he felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Behind them, the World Render exploded in a brilliant flash of light as its damaged reactors finally failed. The Zephyrian Empire's most powerful warship was gone, along with most of its senior command staff. But more importantly, the galaxy had seen that the Empire could be beaten. The real war was just beginning. The command center of Unity Station buzzed with activity as officers from dozens of species analyzed the data stolen from the World Render. Jake stood at the central holographic display, watching as star maps updated with new information about Zephyrian positions and weaknesses. "This is incredible," said Captain Zixtar, her 4 arms working at different control panels simultaneously. "We now know the location of every major Zephyrian base within 50 light years, their supply routes, patrol schedules, even the personal codes of their fleet commanders." Drakmor watched the display in amazement. Red markers showed Zephyrian strongholds that had been hidden for decades, while blue indicators revealed the positions of resistance cells that had been fighting alone in the dark. For the first time, they could see the full scope of both the Empire and the forces arrayed against it. "There," Jake said, pointing to a cluster of green markers on the edge of the display. "Prison World Kethvar. According to this data, they're holding over 3,000 Pyrothane survivors there." Drakmore's heart leaped. He had thought himself the last of his kind, but there were others. His people still lived, scattered across a dozen prison worlds and labor camps. We can free them, Jake continued. With the intelligence from the World Render, we know exactly how those facilities are defended. Rescue operations can begin within the week. And then what? Drakmore asked. My people are warriors, but we are few. What can 3,000 pyrethanes do against an empire of billions? Jake smiled and gestured to the busy command center around them. The same thing that one human did against impossible odds. They can inspire others to fight. They can share their knowledge and skills with allies who need them. They can prove that the Empire is not unbeatable. Over the following days, Jake introduced Drakmore to the full scope of the resistance movement. It was far larger and more organized than the Dragon Prince had imagined. The Unity Station was just one of dozens of mobile bases scattered across the galaxy. Each one served as a coordination point for local resistance cells, providing supplies, training, and tactical support. We started small, Jake explained as they toured the station's manufacturing bays. Just a few species who had survived Zephyrian attacks. But word spread. Every world they conquered sent us refugees who wanted to fight back. Every species they enslaved produced heroes who refused to surrender. In the manufacturing bays, Drakmore saw weapons and ships being built using technology from dozens of different civilizations. Human engineering combined with Altarian energy systems, Nexian computers controlling Cordan weapon platforms. It was a fusion of knowledge that no single species could have achieved alone. This is what makes us different from the Empire, Jake said. They conquer and dominate. We cooperate and share. They see diversity as weakness. We see it as strength. The formal ceremony took place 3 days later in the station's Great Hall. Representatives from over 100 species gathered to witness Prince Drakmore's official pledge to the Resistance Alliance. The dragon stood before the assembled crowd, wearing ceremonial armor that had belonged to his ancestors. For too long, my people have been scattered and broken, Drakmore said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. We thought our time was over, that the glory of the Pyrothane civilization was just a memory. But today I see that memory can become hope. He turned to Jake, who stood nearby wearing the full dress uniform of a Human Defense Coalition admiral. The simple Marine's clothing was gone, replaced by the symbols of rank and honor that Jake had earned over 2 centuries of service. Admiral, Jake Morrison showed me that strength is not measured by the size of your fleet or the power of your weapons. Drakmore continued. True strength comes from the bonds you forge with others, the trust you build and the hope you inspire. Today, I pledge the Pyrothane people to this alliance, not as subjects or servants, but as equals and friends. The ceremony concluded with Drakmore performing an ancient ritual, declaring Jake an honorary member of the Pyrothane royal house. It was the highest honor his people could bestow on an outsider, and it had not been granted in over 1,000 years. You are no longer just Admiral Morrison, Drakmore said as he placed a ceremonial crystal around Jake's neck. You are Prince, Jake, battle brother of the flame, guardian of the ancient ways. My people will follow you to the end of the galaxy if you ask it of them. Jake accepted the honor with quiet dignity. I ask only that they fight alongside us as equals. This war will not be won by any single species or leader. It will be won by all of us working together. In the weeks that followed, the rescued Pyrothanes began arriving at Unity Station. They came in small groups, freed from prison worlds and labor camps by precision strikes that used the World Render's intelligence. Each rescue mission was carefully planned to minimize casualties and maximize the psychological impact on the Empire. The returning Pyrothanes brought with them ancient knowledge that had been thought lost forever. Technologies that could enhance ship shields, weapon designs that had been forgotten for centuries, and most importantly, tactical wisdom from the days when their people had ruled the stars. Your ancestors were master strategists, Jake told Drakmore as they reviewed battle plans together. These formations, these maneuvers, they're brilliant. We can adapt them for modern warfare. And your human tactics complement them perfectly, Drakmore replied. My people were always strong fighters, but you have taught us something we had forgotten. how to fight as part of something larger than ourselves. The true test came 6 months later when the Resistance launched its first major offensive against a Zephyrian core world. The planet Nexarthul was a major industrial center, heavily defended and considered invulnerable by the Empire. It was the perfect target to prove that the Resistance was now a real threat. Jake and Drakmor stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity's Fire, a massive vessel built using combined technologies from the entire Alliance. Around them, the largest Resistance fleet ever assembled prepared for battle. Over 1,000 ships from dozens of species, all working together under a unified command structure. "Are you ready for this?" Jake asked as they watched the enemy planet grow larger on the main display. "I have been ready for 50 years, Drakmor replied. "But now, for the first time, I truly believe we can win." The battle was fierce, but decisive. The Resistance fleet used tactics that no single species could have developed alone, combining human strategic thinking with Pyrothane warrior traditions, Altarian technology, and the fierce determination of 100 oppressed peoples. The Zephyrian defenders were overwhelmed by the coordination and effectiveness of their attackers. When Nexarthul fell, the news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Empire was not invincible. The Resistance was not just a nuisance anymore, but a genuine threat to Zephyrian dominance. Standing on the bridge as Liberation forces landed on the planet below, Jake and Drakmor watched as celebration erupted throughout the fleet. Ships from dozens of worlds fired ceremonial salutes, and voices in 100 languages sang songs of victory. "This is just the beginning," Jake said quietly. "The Empire will strike back hard. They'll throw everything they have against us." Drakmor nodded, but his golden eyes burned with determination. "Let them come. We are no longer scattered survivors hiding in the dark. We are an alliance of free peoples, united by hope and bound by friendship. They cannot defeat what we have become." Jake looked out at the massive fleet surrounding them, ships and crews from across the galaxy working together toward a common goal. What had started as a desperate plan in a prison cell had grown into something that could reshape the entire galaxy. The war was far from over, but for the first time in decades, the oppressed peoples of the galaxy had real hope. And at the center of that hope stood a human who had learned that the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from the bonds forged between unlikely allies. The Zephyrian Empire would soon learn what humanity had always known, that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who look perfectly ordinary until they unite the entire galaxy against you.